Dean Pease is retiring, and we're going to talk about the ways he was probably more successful than people will give him credit for here in Atlanta. We'll talk about some possible replacement candidates for him, and we'll talk about what I'm hoping to see from those replacement candidates in that new defensive coordinator and how it may affect the Falcons offseason.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and a.k.a. the most humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. And guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, it's free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And make sure you check out Locked On Falcons on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, right, as part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta. Just download that Locked On Sports Atlanta app, and you'll be able to get Locked On Falcons, Locked On Bulldogs as part of your Amazon and your Amazon Fire TV and Roku. Yeah. So sorry, guys. All right. So let's talk about Dean Pease. And, this was a little bit of a surprise for me that Dean Pease is retiring. I know to other people, maybe not. But I was talking with some folks over the weekend in the Discord. Shout out to the Discord, link in the description below. Join us for future, weekend conversations on our Saturday symposiums. But, I basically likened it to, I didn't expect Dean Pease to retire because I likened it to the Kobe Bryant quote of job's not done, right? And Dean Pease talking about changing the culture 6 months ago and all that stuff. And with the windfall of cash that the Falcons were going to get this offseason, it felt like to me, like, okay, this is now the time where he can implement all the things that he's been envisioning for, the last couple of years. And at least he's got to stay through, this season to see all that, to see the job get done. And obviously, that expectation proved to be wrong. And so now the Falcons are going to embark on a coaching search for a new coordinator. And we'll talk a little bit later about, where that could leave them and who are the potential candidates. But let's talk first about Dean Pease and sort of now his legacy after 2 years in Atlanta. And, particularly this past year, Dean Pease got a lot of criticism from Falcon fans and to a lesser extent, Falcons media. I don't think that was always fair criticism. I'm a Dean Pease defender when it comes to that, and part of the reason why I like Dean Pease is just, on a personal level, like I enjoyed listening to his weekly pressers because he was, beyond the realm of coach speak and it was no BS. And so called it like he saw it. And, I appreciated that where you're listening to some of these other pressers, and it's not to say that, these guys were bad. And I certainly think, Dave Ragone and Arthur Smith in particular were much more informative, and interesting to listen to in their pressers this year than they were a year ago. But it was a breath of fresh air last year and this year, listening to DPs break down certain things and talk and drop these little nuggets of information and be real, rather than just basically, BSing and always having that wall up, as we often see with coaches when it comes to the media. And, the other factor for me of why I like Dean Pease is, I think he did a better job here in Atlanta than probably he'll get credit for. Right. And the way I sort of look at that is like, I think this defense looked like a well-coached unit, even if it didn't necessarily, get the results of a good defense, but it was a well-coached one given the circumstance. And we'll break that down further. It felt like the things that Dean Pease was expected to do, when that's kind of where we're measuring it, is like, okay, what were the expectations for him? And like one of the expectations was, he would instill that sort of do your job mantra, that Patriots mantra, that famous Patriots mantra here in Atlanta. And I think he did a much better job of that, where I look at this defense and watch the film and I'm seeing far less blown assignments and missed, missed assignments for the defense, in recent weeks than when he arrived there. And so I think that's a testament to, those areas getting better. And then I think when it comes to the bend but don't break defense, which is the thing that Dean Pease always insisted that he was caring about. Like all he cared about was, he didn't care about yards. He only cared about at the end of the day, at the end of the game, the Falcons had more points than the other team. And if they did that, he did his job, right? And I think he probably did a better job of implementing that bend but don't break style of defense than people will give him credit for. And I know part of the reason why people were so critical of him is because they don't like that style of defense. But like the bend but don't break style of defense, you're going to get yards, but you're not going to get points. And so the two areas that you can sort of really measure, okay, are you being able to implement that, is looking at red zone efficiency and, are you giving up the big plays? Because the big plays is you're breaking rather than bending, right? Giving up the 6-yard completion there or 8-yard completion there is not the same as giving up a 28-yard completion or a 36-yarder, or you know what I'm saying? So when you look at the Falcons' red zone defense this year in particular, they finished 14th in red zone efficiency on defense this year, which is above average, right? And then you look at the first 2 weeks where they were really struggling. I think they were like bottom 3 those first 2 games. And in the 15 games since, if you just look at the red zone defense, they were 10th best, right? So they were a top 10 red zone defense for most of this season. And, that's part of the bend but don't break. You can get to the red zone, but we're going to force you to settle for 3. And, we'll get 7 on our end. And, until basically the last month of the season when Desmond Ridder, and, we'll talk about this throughout the offseason of ways to improve this with Ridder at the helm. But, the Falcons, credit to Marcus Mariota, the Falcons were like a top 10 red zone offense for most of this season, basically until like the last month of the season. So like that style worked for them. And then you look at the explosive plays, you look at the percentage of 20 plus yard plays given up per play, right? Per snap. They were 17th in the league, so roughly average, which is fine. Now you look at those numbers a little deeper and you see that they're 26th in terms of big plays given up against the pass on a per play basis and 10th against the run. But to be fair, that pass defense looks so bad because you had that 4-game stretch where both AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward were out, starting with that Bengals game and going to the Thursday night game. And that's really where the Falcons gave up a ton of big plays, explosive plays through the air. And you sort of remove that 4-game sample, from the data, which again, I know is not, but you look at the other 13 games that the Falcons played and just look at the big plays that they allowed in those 13 games. And they would have been overall 4th in the league in terms of big plays allowed. And they would have been 10th against the pass. So, we tend to focus on the pass rush here on the podcast as we should, because the Falcons pass rush has been terrible this year. But, that kind of illustrates some of the issues that they'll have to work through this offseason when it comes to bolstering their cornerback depth. And so I say that because I feel like Dean Pease accomplished what he was trying to do. Have the Jets and on the aircraft carrier fly over with the mission accomplished banner when it came to building a bend but don't break defense. And again, I understand people don't necessarily like that style and would prefer a more aggressive style. But I think the Falcons playing bend but don't break defense actually made the most sense schematically. And to me was further proof that the Falcons are a well-coached team, because you compare that sort of more conservative style to the more aggressive blitz happy style that they had, under Raheem Morris towards the end. Like you saw the sea change with how much this team blitzed in 2020 once Raheem Morris took over as the interim head coach over Dan Quinn after his fire. And that's a big reason why Deion Jones led the team in sacks in 2020. That's why Deion Jones was number 2 in quarterback hits and Foye Oluokun was number 3 in quarterback hits, because they were just blitzing a ton with those linebackers in order to, supplement the pass rush. And it made sense at the time. You could play that aggressive blitz happy style because, being blitz happy is basically the idea of living by the sword, dying by the sword, right? If it works, great. If it doesn't work, you open yourself up to get gashed and giving up those big plays. And the Falcons did give up a ton of big plays in that 2020 season. But it wasn't a big deal in 2020 because if the Falcons found themselves falling into a 10-0 hole in 2020, it's like, who cares, right? They got Matt Ryan, they got Julio Jones, they got Calvin Ridley. And frankly, if they have to become this one-dimensional pass-first offense to sort of climb out of a 10-0 hole in the first quarter and the second quarter, that's actually playing to the strengths of this team, right? So it made sense for Raheem Morris to be as aggressive as he could be. And that was playing to that team's strengths. But the last 2 years, that's not been the Falcons' strength. That you look at this season in particular, if they fell into a 10-0 hole, the game was over, guys. right? Like you look at all their wins this year, outside of one game, right? They never trailed by more than a single score in any of their wins this year, right? By 7 points or more, except for one game, and that was the Bears game. And they trailed by 10 points in that game for 13 seconds. And that 13 seconds was the 13 seconds it took Cordero Patterson to take that kick return to the house after the Bears built that 10-point lead in that game. And so with this run-first offense that lacks explosiveness, right, playing that bend but don't break style of defense totally made sense for what this team was. And that goes back, to a point I've made before that, I know it's controversial to some of you tankers. Like the point is to win games, to play to win. And that's what the Falcons did. And that's what DPs did. And I think that goes back to a point, that differs from where I was like 6 months ago when it came to this coaching staff, where I was much more critical of them because I look back at the 2021 season. I don't think that was a well-coached football team. I know a lot of people look at the win totals and say, oh, this team is so well coached because they won this many games. And I'm like, they're not playing to the strengths of their team. Like they're underachieving. It's not a well-coached football team when you watch it. Now, if you just pay attention to the box scores and look at the standings, maybe you would come to the conclusion that they're well-coached. But this year, offense and defense, in this case with Dean Pease, to me, they were coaching to get the most out of this current group of players. And that was something you couldn't say in 2021. Right. So like, that's part of the reason why, like, if you go back and listen to episode 6 months ago, you're going to hear me a lot more critical of this coaching staff. And now I'm sitting here, essentially, relatively speaking, singing their praises. And so, I will sit here and salute Dean Pease. I think he deserves more credit than he's going to get from a lot of fans. And, we'll talk a little bit later about sort of the idea of that fans often have that, we'll fix the defense by changing the scheme, which, is a falsehood. But we'll talk a little bit more about some of the possible candidates that the Falcons could be looking at and sort of the timetable that we're talking about when it comes to replacing Dean Pease. And so we'll get into all of that, guys, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But first, I want to tell you about PrizePicks, a fun new way to play daily fantasy. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It takes less than 60 seconds to enter, and the great thing is you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus projections. And so if you want to look at their projections at the NFL, the NBA, NHL, PGA, college football, esports, they got you covered. PrizePicks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you got to do is download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, they'll give you $100 to play with. So don't forget that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, it is playoff season, but it is also tax season. And no one likes tax season. So go to TurboTax so that you don't have to do your taxes. You can meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of doing taxes and file so that you don't have to, and you can not do your taxes. Show your eyes something that is not taxes. Unpack a moving box that is not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so that you can relax. It feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? So come to TurboTax, don't do your taxes, and visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So, guys, I want to thank you again for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. And for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL. Mondays, you get the game-to-game breakdowns with the local insiders. Fridays, you get the key predictions. So check out Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So what's interesting, when Tom Pelissero of NFL Network first, tweeted that, Dean Pease was retiring, he indicated that you can expect a wide search for his replacement. And, color me skeptical. And, call me Mr. Skeptical, as we've discussed many times. And, if you guys have any creative suggestions for some new aliases that incorporates my skepticism, we can incorporate that at the top of the show. So leave a comment or hit me up elsewhere for some suggestions there. But, I'm a little skeptical about the idea of the Falcons running a wide search. And that, I don't know anything, but I'm just saying, like, just me being a natural skeptic, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Because, we know coaching, at all levels is less about what you know and it's who you know business, right? And so it would not shock me at all if the Falcons promoted from within. And, we saw Frank Bush, the Falcons linebacker coach, fill in for Dean Pease when he was briefly hospitalized in week 15 during that sort of pregame collision against the Saints. And Frank Bush, I believe it's either him or Ted Montesino, the outside linebackers coach, has the most experience as an NFL defensive play caller at the NFL level. I think it's Frank Bush. I think he's got like 4 or 5 years. They're not great, Houston interim Jets, and I think maybe Miami or the Rams. I can't recall. But one of the things, because it's a who you know business, one of the things that I nerd out about, I am a nerd. I got a spreadsheet that I kept track of Mike Smith's, all the various coaching staffs Mike Smith was a part of to see sort of his coaching connections. Did it with Dan Quinn, do the same thing with Arthur Smith. And so I'm looking through the spreadsheet and I'm looking at a couple of names of like, okay, who are some defensive coordinators that, Arthur Smith has previous contact with, that's where Dean Pease from their shared time in Tennessee. And I'm looking at, Jerry Gray, who I believe is with the Packers right now, is like a passing game coordinator. Greg Williams, who I think is now in the XFL, but spent some time not only in Tennessee and Washington with Arthur Smith. A couple other names that stood out to me. Deshae Townsend was a DB's coach in Tennessee. I think he's now the Jaguars defensive passing game coordinator. Tyrone McKenzie was a linebackers coach when Dean Pease was there in Tennessee. And I remember a couple of years ago, he was kind of an up and coming coach candidate. And I think he's now with the Dolphins. Another name that stood out to me that has nothing to do with the defensive coordinator search, but it was Nick Eason, a D-line coach. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember Nick Eason when he played in the NFL. And he's now a D-line coach at Clemson. And he was also a D-line coach last year, I think, at Auburn. And I go, that's interesting. Clemson has a couple of pass rushers that Nick Eason's coached. Arthur Smith knows Nick Eason, Auburn has a couple of pass rushers that are projected to go early in the draft that, Nick Eason's coach. Arthur Smith knows Nick Eason. So I'm sitting here planting that seed going like, okay, this is something, maybe not a January conversation, but maybe an April conversation. Because we know there's, history with this regime coaching connections. Like, oh, Kyle Pitts' position coach was Justin Peel's position coach. Oh, Luke Fickell was Desmond Ritter's coach, and Luke Fickell, Mike Vrabel, Arthur Smith, John Hogue, San Diego State, his son, Darren Hall, all that sort of stuff and more. So I'm sitting here going, Nick Eason, that's a name to remember. We'll circle back to Nick Eason. So probably not a defensive coordinator candidate, but probably worthy of a conversation when we get to April. But, those are some of the names that I'm seeing, at least on my little spreadsheet, right? That I'm saying like, okay, maybe if we're talking about who you know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Arthur Smith is going to do that. There's several coaches on the Falcons coaching staff that Arthur Smith didn't have direct connections or wasn't like one, degree removed from, when it came to his coaching staff. And so maybe he could pilfer some of these open jobs now. It's Black Monday as I'm recording this, and we'll see what other jobs come open over the course of the week. But we know there are 5 firings this year, 5 open jobs, and you could pilfer maybe the D coordinators from some of these teams that now that these guys are available. You got Vance Joseph in Arizona. You got Ajiro Evero in Denver. You got Lovie Smith in Houston. Carolina with Steve Wilkes. Indianapolis with Gus Bradley. Some of those guys make sense. So, whoever they hire, I think is going to have a dramatic impact on what this team's offseason plans, going back to what we're talking about when we look at what this regime has done through 2 seasons now, that they have primarily signed players that they know. Now, the question that we're going to have, right, over the next couple of, months, and to me, this offseason is going to be pivotal, is like, is that a reflection of, them spending on a budget? And will that continue now that they, or should at least not be hamstrung by, bargain shopping? Or is that just the way that they operate? Right. And so, if that's the way that they operate, obviously a new defensive coordinator, especially if he's from outside the organization, may incorporate a new talent pool from which the Falcons can pick from if they continue that. But it's going to be interesting, at least with that sort of situation, I kind of liken it to like when you're on a budget, right? And you got, got $5 in your pocket and you got to go get some food, right? You're not going to go out there and experiment or whatever. You're going to go to McDonald's. You're going to go to some place that has a dollar menu that you can stretch $5, right? You tried and trues or whatever. And so to me, the question with the Falcons at this point in time, now that, they have a little bit more than $5 in their pocket, like, are they going to McDonald's because they're on a budget, because they're cheap? They only have $5 in the pocket these last 2 years. And now that they have an expanded budget, are they still going to go to McDonald's because they're picky, right? They like the consistency. They know exactly what they're going to get with McNuggets and a quarter pounder with cheese, that sort of thing. And, part of me wonders with a new defensive coordinator, like, maybe they expand that menu, go beyond McDonald's, and maybe the new defensive coordinator, he likes Chipotle or something like that. So that's going to be something that we will continue to discuss and unpack over the course of this offseason as we get geared up to free agency. But, speaking of free agency, that's going to be where we continue this conversation, because now we're going to talk about, some potential candidates who I would like to see, right? Who my ideal defensive coordinator candidate is. And that may surprise a couple of you. And we'll get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons podcast, guys. But before we get there, let me tell you about the number one source for your sports betting info. That is, of course, betonline.net. BetOnline.net is the number one source for not only your sports betting info, but your stats, your news, your analysis, your podcasts, right? You can find all those at betonline.net. Get the latest trends and odds for every professional league out there, from football to basketball, soccer to esports. They've got you covered at BetOnline. They got you covered this weekend for, the playoff action, guys. I love playoff season because this is where, I can really make my money back from all the money I lost at BetOnline during the season, because I love betting against first-time quarterback playoff starters. Like my tried and true is, if you're a first-time quarterback starter in the playoff game, you're probably going to play poorly. And the only history tells me that you're only going to win if you're backed by a great defense. Now, unfortunately, that strategy may not work quite as well this year, because pretty much most of the playoff field is guys starting their first playoff game. So we'll sort of have to pick and choose, but I'll be heading to betonline.net. So you should head to betonline.net. Use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And guys, can your Bluetooth portable speaker hang with the Big Dog? Big Dog gives you the portable Bluetooth speaker specifically designed in Augusta, Georgia, to deliver huge, clear sound, extraordinary battery life, and tons of connectivity options at a great price. If you want to party with friends, they got you. If you want to take or make a phone call, they got you. It's built to do it all. It's backed by 100% satisfaction guarantee plus a 1-year warranty. So go big with the Big Dog Scout, their inaugural model, and it includes a max volume of 105 decibels. It's 40 watts. It's waterproof. It charges other devices. You get 15 hours of playback, and you compare two of them for that enhanced stereo sound. I got my Big Dog Scout speakers, 2 of them, hooked up to my computer so I can get that enhanced stereo sound. So check it out at bigdogspeakers.com. It's now available at a price of $99. But guys, you're going to get $20 off with the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. For more info, just visit bigdogspeakers.com. So guys, my ideal candidate is, drumroll please, I don't have a name for you. I'm sorry. Spoiler alert. I can tell you what I ideally want in a defensive coordinator, just sort of the generic thoughts on what I think a good defensive coordinator will be, but who specifically that person is, I don't know. Right. What I want is, someone who understands the value of disguise and not being static in the back end and mixing up their coverages. Someone who understands the value of not being static up front and mixing up your fronts and being hybrid and applying pressure, bringing those 4-man, 5-man, 6-man, and occasionally 7-man pressure concepts, right? That's what I want to see. But who that specific guy is, that's a generic defensive coordinator, that incorporates some of the stuff that, Raheem Morris did and Dean Pease did and Dan Quinn did and Marco Emanuel did, all that stuff, and just sort of hybridize all those guys together and, spit out the best defensive coordinator, right? But I don't have a name attached to who that is. I'm sorry, I disappoint you. I'm sure maybe some of you guys have, but part of that is, I've given up a long time ago of thinking that I can, decipher who's going to be a good coach, who's going to be a good coordinator many years ago. Part of the reason why when we went through the hiring cycle with Arthur Smith, I was being, that jaded, bitter old man that was like, people were like, who you want the Falcons? I'm like, I don't know, someone good, right? That's kind of how I am, guys. Like, I don't know. I learned many years ago that I have no idea. I can do like the rest of you guys can do. I can look at Wikipedia. I can look at, their numbers at Pro Football Reference. I can read articles and interviews, and, I can break down the resume. And certainly when we get through some of these candidates over the coming weeks, right, we'll do that stuff here on the podcast. We'll give you that analysis here for some of these candidates and ultimately who the Falcons wind up choosing. But whether that leads to that person being a successful defensive coordinator here in Atlanta or really anywhere, I have no clue, right? And some of that is owed to the fact that, like my belief is that I don't think scheme is all that consequential. I'm not saying that it's inconsequential. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but I don't think it matters nearly as much as a lot of people, a lot of fans think it does. And that's been something I've been preaching on this podcast for the last 5 years. Despite, the recycled takes over and over from fans I've heard during that period of time, like this new defensive coordinator is going to fix the defense. And I'm sure over the next 6 months, we'll be hearing those same takes, between now and the start of the season. Oh, Lovie Smith or Brian Flores or, Vance Joseph or Frank Bush, he's going to fix it. He's going to fix it. All the problems are going to go away. And I heard this before. I heard it in 2018 with Marquand Manuel. Heard it 2019 with Dan Quinn. I heard it in 2020 with Raheem Morris. Heard it in 2021 with Dean Pease. I'm sure I'm going to hear it in 2023 with, insert name here. But all those years, I'm like, y'all can sit here and talk about the scheme this and scheme that, and this guy's going to fix it. And every single year, I was sitting here going like, what's going to fix the defense? Having a pass rush, right? If you build it, they will come, so to speak, right? And so that's going to be the same question I have for the new guy. Right. Frankly, I don't really care who's the defense coordinator. I don't really care, what your scheme is. Like, what I care about this offseason, guys, who are you going to sign? Who are the free agents you're going to sign that's going to be able to implement this scheme? Right. It's never been about scheme, at least in my opinion. It's always been about talent. Right. You can play this man heavy, blitz happy scheme. If Brian Flores is a great example of a person that had that type of scheme in Miami and New England. Right. And you can sit there and say, like, okay, like, we got AJ Terrell. Let's get another high level corner, right? And so I'm interested less in Brian Flores as the defense coordinator. I'm interested in who that other high level corner is, right? And like it goes back to a conversation we've been having the last couple of years with Dean Pease, where I think a lot of people made the mistake of thinking Dean Pease was just like his protege Wink Martindale, who brought that high level blitz happy scheme to Baltimore. And Wink Martindale's defense worked great, right? When Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey were healthy. You can man up Jamar Chase. You can man up T. Higgins with those guys healthy. But then they got hurt. And then they got eviscerated. And that's been, this part of the reason why people should listen to Dean Pease. Right? Just make assumptions. Like, he literally said this like within the first month or two he was on the job, which is like, part of the reason why he didn't build that type of defense is because if you get injured, if someone tweaks an ankle, someone hurts their hamstring or whatever, you can't play that way anymore. If you're built around, having these two elite top flight cover corners and then they get hurt, you got to change how you scheme, because unless your backup is just as good as Marcus Peters or Marlon Humphrey or AJ Terrell or Casey Hayward, you can't play that style of defense. It'll break your defense. And so, like, that's why I sit here and I go, if you're going to hire a Brian Flores type of player, then you not only need to get, a number 2 corner opposite AJ Terrell that can play that style, but you also need to get a good number 3, a good number 4 that can fill in the event that AJ Terrell and that other corner get hurt, and have safeties that can do that sort of thing. Or you can go the opposite way and build it. Brian Flores style defense is building it back to front. You can go the opposite way and hire a Lovie Smith and build it front to back. And Lovie Smith's going to run that zone. He's going to run Tampa 2, right? He's going to rush 4. It's an antiquated way of playing defense. I think it can still work, probably not as effectively as it did when he was in Chicago. But, I still think you can run a competent defense playing that style of football. But if you're going to run that style of defense, you better be able to get pressure with 4 guys, right? You better have a Nick Bosa. You see it with the 49ers. Nick Bosa missed 1 game this year. You guys know which game that was. They lost that game, didn't they? Right? He was playing injured in 2 other games. Those are the only 2 games, I think, that they gave up more than 30 points in this game. So if you don't have the depth, if you don't have the 4 guys that can get pressure with 4, and you don't have the depth that if one of your guys goes down that can continue to get that pressure with 4, guess what? That style of scheme, Lovie Smith, D'Amico Ryans, be damned. It doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to be effective doing that. So basically, I'm less interested, guys, in who the new defensive coordinator is, personally. This is my personal opinion. You're entitled to your own. But I'm less interested in who the new defensive coordinator is. I'm more interested in who are you going to sign, who are you going to draft to play that scheme. So if you want to be hyper aggressive, then, you got to invest not only in, the guys on the back end that can cover in the man coverages, but you probably also, if you're pushing for a Brian Flores type of defensive coordinator, you probably should be pushing for, the Falcons, taking that corner in round one that can play opposite AJ Terrell. But you probably need to also push for that wide receiver in round two that can be that explosive playmaker. Because again, if you're going to play that blitz happy scheme and live by the sword, die by the sword, you might find yourself in some 10-0 holes. And so if you don't have playmakers that can get you out of that 10-0 hole with a Desmond Ridder, a Drake London, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're going to lose a lot of football games, even though you're playing, that blitz happy, aggressive defense that you've been saying, for the previous 6 months, all off season, that was going to magically make all the problems go away. And so ultimately, to me, what style of defense you want, it's a preference thing. It's like, what flavor ice cream you like. You like chocolate? You like vanilla? Rocky Road? Pistachio? My opinion, guys, I don't care. It's all ice cream. It all tastes good to me. Right? That's kind of how I see it. So I'm not picky, right? I've been known to eat at McDonald's a time or two a month, but like, I'm not out here eating at McDonald's because it's the only food I like, right? So I'm not picky when it comes to these sorts of things. So maybe you are. By all means, let me know who you think the Falcons should hire. But that's kind of how I feel about it. We'll see. But like, what I'm focused on is less on who the D coordinator is, and it's like, okay, if you're going to play that blitz happy scheme, who's going to play opposite AJ Terrell? That's what I'm interested in. If we're going to play that, rush 4 every snap and play zone on the back end, all right, who alongside Grady Jarrett and AK are going to rush the quarterback? That's what I'm interested in. So we'll obviously, cover the D coordinator interviews and ultimately the hire. So, it's not to say we'll ignore it or anything like that. And when I say, like, I don't care, it's like, I care, but probably not as much as you guys do. That's basically what I mean when I say that stuff. So we'll keep you covered here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, because I'm looking forward to, again, going back to, are we eating at McDonald's or are we eating at Chipotle this offseason? Right? We going to Ruth's Chris now that we got a little bit of cheddar in our pocket. We going to steakhouse. We going, 5-star steakhouse. 3 Michelin stars. What? I don't know. I don't know how the stars work. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm invested in. So again, if you're invested in who they hire as a D coordinator, by all means, hit me up, leave a comment, hit me up in the Discord, send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Twitter, Facebook, Locked On Falcons, all those places. I'm curious who you guys think. I care what you guys think about the D coordinator hire. So I care. All right. Please tell me all about who you think is going to be the great hire. I really, really care. So that's what we'll be getting into. That we'll be getting into more stuff, guys. As this offseason, probably over the next couple of days, I'll sit down and really, like, map out what my offseason plans are. But tomorrow we'll be breaking down the all-22. And then probably we'll talk a little bit more about some Rich McKay comments that, before Dean Peasley's retirement, I thought we were going to address on today's episode on sort of, is there pressure on this regime to win in 2023? So we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the week. And so, yeah, we'll figure this stuff out. And, basically what I'll let you guys know is a lot of January is going to be, reflection on this season, self-evaluation. So that when we get to the, February and March portion of this offseason, and certainly April, when we get to the draft, and we can talk about what we need, we all are sort of on the same page of, like, okay, these are the areas of weakness. These are the things that we need to get better at, all these various things. So that's what we'll probably be focused on over the next, 3-4 weeks between now and the Super Bowl. So look forward to that. Make sure you check us out as your first listen. Until then, make sure you check out Locked On NFL, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Bulldogs, guys, for your second listen. Probably, as many of you guys are listening to this on Tuesday, maybe you make Locked On Bulldogs your first listen to get the reaction to, did they beat TCU? Or maybe you check out Locked On Horned Frogs, right? Hey, check it out. I don't know. We'll see. Great breakdown, Locked On NFL Draft, Locked On NFL, all that stuff and more here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, guys.